Hey guys, Strongboy13. Today, we're watching in this video. I want to talk about, this is the first one I came up with. Again, it's not going to be all the time, it'll be sometimes, occasionally. But I'm going to be talking about the extreme UK weather event of 1987, which was the big storm of 1987. Before I started it off first, random choice. But it will be an interesting one though, so I'll tell you loads of facts and information about that storm in case you guys never heard about it. So, roll the intros! The storm has now arrived! Hey guys, it's Stormboy13. Don't ask about my t-shirt, yeah, it doesn't look that clean, but I can't be bothered. It's, tonight, I want to talk to you about an event. It was probably the deadliest, stormiest event that we had in UK history. And if it wasn't for the mistake on the forecast, it could have been slightly different results. Yeah, but all I'm just saying is that what I was going to say is I want to talk to you about the facts about the 1987 storm, how that happened, how much damage did it cost. I want to talk to you about it for tonight, well, or today, depending what time you're watching this. That was well, I was not born when that happened, I can tell you that. 30 years ago that happened, and yeah, I mean, first of all guys, let's begin by showing you probably the most controversy weather forecast ever in British UK television history. Take a look at this video if you haven't watched it yet.
Good afternoon to you. Earlier on today, apparently a woman rang the BBC and said she heard that there was a hurricane on the way. Well, if you're watching, don't worry, there isn't. But having said that, actually, the weather will become very windy, but most of the strong winds, incidentally, will be down over Spain and across into France as well. But there's a vicious-looking area of low pressure on our doorstep, nevertheless, around about the Brittany area, and that is going to head across the southeastern corner of the country, bringing, if nothing else, a lot of rain with it. On the satellite picture you can see that there's of course a lot of cloud as well as a lot of rain stretching right across Europe. Indeed, most areas there are just as unsettled as we are, having some outbreaks of rain. That's the way the rainfall pattern is looking at the moment. A lot of shading, a lot of rain across many parts of Europe. Let's zoom in a little bit closer and have a look at the British scene though. And as you can see, rain is now pushing up towards southern counties. There's a fair bit of rain still further north left over from last night's weather system. Now as I run the sequence, you can see just how quickly the rain comes up from France, affects many southern and eastern areas, and then eventually later on tonight clears on out of the way and leaves us tomorrow in a fairly stiff run of westerly winds, bringing along quite a few showers. Well, I had a peep at the radar just before I came down a short while ago, and it looked as if rain wasn't very far away from the London area, but certainly some outbreaks of rain coming nicely now into many southern counties of England. The more midland areas and Wales are a little bit brighter and drier, just one or two showers around. Northern England, Northern Ireland and Scotland, though, a fair amount of cloud. And again, there are some outbreaks of rain, and some of the rain fairly heavy, although it's beginning to ease off and turn showery now over Northern Ireland. Now, as time goes on, the rain in the north will edge up into northern parts of Scotland, tend to brighten up a little bit and dry up in the more northern areas there of England. But the rain further south really setting in as time goes on for East Anglia, many southern parts of England, the afternoon ending up very wet and quite cool too, 12 or 13 Celsius only the mid-50s Fahrenheit. Now, to begin with this evening, a lot of wet weather around in many eastern and southern parts of the country. Fairly heavy rain in that, still some quite heavy rain in that northern part of Scotland as well. But the rain in the north of Scotland will slowly clear away, and the rain in the south as well, except that is, I think, in those eastern counties where it will last into the morning. And as it clears away, the clouds should break, but it will leave behind just one or two showers. Becoming quite windy, you're going to notice it around these southern and southeastern parts as the evening and night goes on. A reasonably cool night as well. Now there's the picture for tomorrow. Stiff westerly winds, and that means to say that once the rain clears from the east, it's a mixture of sunshine and showers for us all, and rather cool with it.
Yeah, so that video you just saw there, that was nearly 30 years ago. Michael Fish doing his probably for a few people a life costly weather forecast. But as you know, technology was nowhere near as good as it was over a quarter of a century ago, because they didn't have these superpowered computers. And the thing is, we learn new every year. These weather forecasters, the presenters, the meteorologists, all sorts of these guys. But even with advanced technology, forecasters can still easily get it wrong. It's just about how much certainty you get from these computers predicting what the weather systems we may get across all parts of the UK. We may dodge it, we may catch one directly. So it's still a lot of searching now, how we can easily predict more severe storms in the future for our country. So I want to tell you guys about the main thing that happened of the Great Storm of 1987. So this was what the Great Storm of 1987 did. It formed on the 15th of October 1987, and it dissipated the following day. The lowest pressure was 953 millibars, which is pretty low. The highest winds exceeded 134 miles per hour. It wasn't just UK that was affected. France, Spain, Belgium and Norway were also the European countries that were affected. 22 lives lost, and the damage was roughly £2 billion until up to today, £5 billion. What happened was, the Great Storm 1987 was an unusually violent extratropical cyclone that occurred on the night of the 15th to 16th of October, with hurricane force winds causing casualties in England, France, Channel Islands, as a severe depression in the Bay of Biscay moved northeast. The most damaged areas were roughly around Greater London, East Anglia Coast home counties, the west vicinity and the continental Presenia of Normandy, which weathered gusts typically with a term period of 1 in 200 years. Forests, parks, roads and railways were strewn with fallen trees, as well as schools been closed. The British National Grid suffered heavy damage, leaving thousands without power. As I said, in England and France, 22 people died. The highest measured gust of 135 miles per hour was recorded at Pont-de-Vogue, Greenville, France. The highest gust in the UK, 120 miles per hour was recorded ashore and by sea. The day's weather reports had failed to indicate a storm of such severity, and earlier correct forecasts have been negated by later projections. The apparent suggestion by BBC's Michael Fish for false alarm, is celebrated as a classic gaffe, even though he claims he was misquoted. Major improvements were later implemented in astronomic observation, related to computer models, and the training of forecasters. So yeah, that was, I think that day onwards, that definitely needed a change. On the Sunday before the storm struck, the farmers' forecast predicted bad weather on the following Thursday or Friday, midweek. However, guidance from weather prediction models was somewhat equivalent. Instead of stormy weather over considerable parts of the UK, the model suggested that severe weather reached no farther north than the English Channel and the coastal parts of southern England. During the afternoon on the 15th, winds were very light over most parts of the UK. The pressure gradient was slack. The depression was drifting slowly northwards over the North Sea of eastern Scotland. A trough lay over England, Wales and Ireland. Over the Bay of Biscay, a depression was developing. So really the first warnings was in the sea areas in English Channel around 6:30 on the 15th, and were followed by 4 hours later by warnings of severe gales. As you know, it got worse to 964 millibars by 6 p.m. Even by 10:35, force 10 winds were forecast, and then by midnight the depression over the western English Channel and then the central pressure was only 953 millibars. Then after midnight, before 2 a.m. on the 16th, force 11 winds were issued, and then moved northeast, reaching the Humber estuary around 5:30, by which time its central pressure was still very low, 959 millibars. Dramatic increases in temperature were associated with the passage of the storm's warm front. In the sea areas, warnings of severe weather were both timely and adequate, although forecasts for land left much to be desired. In the evening on 15th, radio and TV forecasts mentioned strong winds, but indicate heavy rain would be the main feature rather than wind. By the time most people went to bed, exceptionally strong winds have not been mentioned in national radio and TV weather broadcasts. The warnings of severe weather have been issued, however, to various agencies and emergency authorities, including the London Fire Brigade. Perhaps the most important warning was issued by the Met Office, the Ministry of Defence, 1:35 on the 16th. It warned that the anticipated consequences of the storm were such that several civil authorities might need to call in assistance from the military. And as you can see from the picture, this was in Chelmsford, I think. Yeah, pretty bad. Nothing like the Caribbean or something like that when there's actual hurricanes affecting that part of the world. So the winds was 137 miles per hour was recorded, the highest gust. It wasn't actually in the UK. It was in Queensland, Brittany, 135 miles per hour in rainfall normality. But even in South East England, the greatest damage occurred was 81 miles per hour near the capital, while more were recorded continuing 3 or 4 hours. The winds veered from southerly to southwesterly. Damage pattern in South East England suggested that tornadoes occupied the storm. There might have been one or two mini ones, but generally it was the widespread storm that generally caused a huge amount of damage, let alone these isolated twisters. And also according to the Beaufort scale wind intensities, the storm had winds of hurricane force 12, which is exceptionally rare in this country. The hurricane always obviously refers to tropical cyclones originating North Atlantic or the North Pacific. As you know, hurricanes have a very different wind profile and distribution from storms and significantly high precipitation levels. Generally for our country, I'm just going to focus on the UK. The storm made landfall in Cornwall before tracking northeast towards Devon and then over our region, the Midlands. Going out to sea fire was strongest gusts of up to 100 knots, 120 miles per hour, recorded along the southeastern edge of the storm, hitting mainly Hampshire, Sussex, Essex and Kent. It caused massive damage over much of England, and 15 million trees, can you believe that, collapsed on that storm, including 6 of the 7 umbious oaks in Sevenoaks. Even in Kent, a quarter of the trees were brought down. There have been many claims that the damage to forestry was made worse by broadleaf trees still being in leaf at the time of the storm. It also blocked roads, railways, and left widespread structural damage primarily to windows and roofs. And not surprisingly, 700,000 people were left without power, and some not even fully restored until around 2 weeks later. And sea, many small boats were wrecked. A Sea Link cross-channel ferry, the MV Hengist, was driven ashore by Folkestone, and a bulk carrier MV Suddenly capsized in Dover. In London, many of the trees lining streets were blown down from that storm, particularly plane trees blocking roads and crushing parked cars. Building construction, scaffolding and billboards had collapsed in many places. Many buildings were damaged, and the following morning, the BBC's largest broadcasting site in White City, Lime Grove Centre, was unable to function due to a power failure. ITV's TVA and BBC One's breakfast time programmes were broadcast from remarkably different emergency facilities. While TVA broadcast from Thames Television's Euston Road studios, while BBC newsreader Nicholas Witchell had to broadcast from BBC One Community Studio, BBC Television Centre, with the wall decorations used for children's BBC hastily taken down on emergency formats. Much of the public transport in the capital was not functioning, and people were advised against trying to go to work. And this is a bit of a picture, the storm damage in London. Yeah. As you know, the aftermath of the storm, it cost £2 billion initially, making the second most expensive UK weather event on record to insurers after the Bernstein storm of 1990. Interesting. If you want me to do that one, you just comment below. Obviously, storm hit the island right around 2 in the morning, and Shanklin Pier on the southeast coast of the island was broken into 3 pieces as a result of mountainous waves, not far from like tsunami kind of waves in a way, although it's not really moving across, but you know what I mean, in terms of the height of the waves. Plans to rebuild the pier were soon abandoned. The rest of the pier was demolished by contractors shortly afterwards. The monument now stands in front of what used to be the pier entrance. So yes, caused a lot of disruption that day. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised the transport or public transport from across all around London were completely called off for several days because of that storm. And obviously the Met Office was severely criticised by most of the national press for failing to forecast the storm correctly, and probably Michael Fish as well. Like, you know, the very famous line from Michael Fish hours before the storm hit. Early on today, apparently, a woman rang the BBC and said she heard there was a hurricane on the way. Well, if you're watching, don't worry, Davison. But having said that, actually, the weather will become very windy, but most of the strong wind, incidentally, will be down over Spain and across into France. As you know, Michael has subsequently claimed that his comments about a hurricane had nothing to do with the UK. They referred to Florida, he was saying, when linked to a news story immediately preceding weather bulletin that had been so widely repeated out of context that the British public remains convinced that it was referring to the approaching storm. According to Fish and Michael Fish, the woman in question was actually a colleague's mother, who was about to go on holiday in the Caribbean. I called regarding the already long anticipated Hurricane Floyd to see if it would be safe to travel. Michael Fish also claimed that nobody phoned up and that there was a non-existing woman, apparently contradicting the previous declaration, which interviewed about Anita Hart's claims of being the woman who made the call. As you know, he did went on to warn viewers that it would be very windy across south of England, but predicted that the storm would move further south. Hey, technology's great 30 years ago. Across the English Channel, British mainland would escape the worst effects. The remainder of this warning is frequently let out of reruns. Obviously, it just hit our country, and that was just not cool. As you know, so it's claimed this storm was the worst since the Great Storm of 1703, which has been challenged as the myth. As we know, storms of such a strength have a return period of 30 to 40 years. But that could change maybe one day in global warming. The unusual aspect of the storm was that it struck densely populated southeast of England. The winds in southeast had a term period of 1 in 200 years, does not mean the winds strength occur on an average once every 200 years, but that the winds have a 0.5% probability of happening in a given year. Following the storm, 1.3 million incidents of damage were reported, which is only conceded by the gale January 1976, where destruction covered a wider area of the UK, with 1.5 million incidents of damage reported. The Burnstay storm hit the United Kingdom January 1990, less than 3 years later, and with comparable intensity. I can always talk about that another time. And was also probably referred to as Black Monday. Wider impacts following the storm, few dealers made it to their desks, and the stock market trading was suspended twice, and the market closed early at 12:30 in the afternoon. The disruption meant the city was unable to respond to late dealings at the beginning of the Wall Street fallout Friday the 16th. Where the Dow Jones Industrial Average recorded its biggest ever one-day slide at the time, a fall of 108.36. City traders and investors spent the weekend, 17th, 18th October, preparing damaged gardens between trying to guess market reaction and assessing the damage. October 19th, Black Monday, was memorial as being the first business day of the London markets after the Great Storm. Some facts next. Right, it wasn't 26 years ago, it's 30 now. This was 4 years ago, or 3.5 years ago since this website was up. But as you know, we may have another devastating storm. Well, I said we might see a repeat of it, but the storm of 1987 was the most devastating storm in nearly 300 years. Children were obviously climbing trees when those storms hit, and that's never a safe solution. So this is just some facts and stuff. Anything new? We know it's the worst storm in nearly 300 years, and claimed 22 lives in just a 3-hour period. It's kind of not unusual to happen at this time of year during the months of October, November. something like that. It's obviously, you know, when the warm sea temperatures meet the cool sea temperatures, you know, with the different wind patterns and the way different air masses meet together and creates with these storms in a jet stream. There must have been something troubling somewhere in another part of the world, which might have made a possible knock-on effects with our country in a way. Thankfully, it's exceptionally rare for these storms to happen in our country, because like you just heard a few minutes ago, the second most costliest storm in UK history. I mean, like, will it ever happen again at some point in our lives? I don't know. We do have loads of storms from time to time, but that storm was by a clear mile the biggest the UK's ever had. I want to show you one more video before I close the video. Take a look at this. Alright, this is probably the damage of the storm 1987 that it cost. So I'm just going to put it on full screen, and sorry it's a bit zoomed in, so let's have a quick look at this.
There's not been a storm like this in the south coast counties.
You can see clearly, sorry I'm filming this from a video, but
the scale of the devastation hasn't been
roof
experienced
got
since the
blown
Second
off,
World War.
unbelievable.
Houses and blocks of flats had their roofs torn away. People were rescued by firemen from buildings in danger of collapse.
Crikey.
2 firemen were killed answering an emergency call in Dorset when a tree fell on their cab.
Not a safe
2
idea to
Sussex
call them.
policemen were lucky to escape when their patrol car was hit by a falling tree.
You'll have to get out of there.
This pile of flotsam is all that's left of the famous Shanklin Pier on the Isle of Wight. It had withstood channel storms for nearly a century, but last night gave up the struggle. It's the end of the pier. The owners say it wasn't insured, and nobody could possibly afford to replace it. All along the south coast, there's been wholesale damage to yachts and boatyards. The hurricane-force winds which lashed the capital in the early hours of the morning were the worst ever recorded, up to 107 miles an hour. The West End took a battering. Some department stores had their shop fronts blown out. By dawn, the winds had died down, but the damage remained. Many roads were blocked by fallen trees. Commuters were advised to stay at home. Those
God, that house
had
didn't
to
get
find their own
completely
way
destroyed.
around or through obstacles. The London Fire Brigade was inundated with a record number of emergency calls.
How long would that take to do that?
In North London, firemen rescued a woman after a chimney collapsed. She fell through every floor of the 3-storey house, but wasn't seriously hurt. Large areas of London and the southeast had power cuts. Overhead, electricity lines were blown down, forcing generating stations to be switched out of the national grid to prevent an overload. The power failures and the fact that so few city workers made it to work meant that there were almost no deals struck on either the stock exchange or the money markets. Most dealers took the opportunity to go for an early and a long lunch. Down in the Thames estuary, a crane was blown onto its side at the port of Sheerness. Troops were called in to help clear up at a devastated caravan site on the south coast. A sealing ferry was blown aground near Folkestone. All 20 members of the crew are safe. There were no passengers on board.
Good news for
Further
that.
along the south coast, a graphic example of the power of the storm. A Sussex woodland, flattened by the wind. At the Suffolk port of Felixstowe, the tanker the Silver Falcon was torn from its berth in a Force 11 gale, swept out into the harbour after first smashing into a jetty. The docks were evacuated in case of an explosion. Eventually a tug was able to tow the tanker into Ipswich. At Harwich, the Home Office detention ship, the ferry Earl William, was also out of control in the Stour estuary. Tamil refugees on board had a frightening time as the ship temporarily ran aground, before finding a firm anchorage. At Jaywick, 100 caravans were wrecked. Campers were evacuated to a nearby school, damage put at more than £250,000.
Oh my
The
God.
camp's amusement arcade reduced to a pile of rubble. On the main roads this morning, drivers weaved their way around Fort...
Well, I think that's plenty. Shame that happened, unfortunately. But But as we know, hopefully, if we do see a similar storm one day, we'll be more prepared for the potential consequences. Alright, hope you enjoyed this video, guys. The first one of this year. Thought of it myself, so which next one do you want me to do? The most recent one, or one that's happened a very long time ago? Comment below, guys, for any extreme UK weather events request. I'll be really grateful. Yes, that's all I've got to say. Alright, thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Like, comment, subscribe. I'll subscribe if you need anything. Alright, storm is now out, guys. Hope you enjoyed this video.